So, Dr. Martin Adams, very
Thank you.
exciting. The Doctor being a very new and exciting title. Incredibly well done. And thank you so, so much for joining me today for this interview.
Thank you. So
It,
start wherever you like.
yeah, so well, we're here today to kind of explore existential ideas in maybe in a more informal way, that more of the population might be able to comprehend. So a good starting point is, in your own words, how would you describe existential ideas?
I was afraid of that question. I hate this question. How would I describe them? I'm trying to think of a way of describing it in as few single syllable words as possible. But I guess I think of existentialism as, I mean, it's a shame that existentialism is such a long word, because it's not that difficult, really. For me, it's not much more than being about what it's like to be alive. If you want to put all those single syllable words into one word, then you could, that you get a multi-syllable word. So it's just about what it's like to be alive. And if we think a bit more about the principles of existentialism, it starts with, as far as I'm concerned, it starts with the idea that we are is more significant than what we are. That we exist is the most astonishing thing, and the fact that we are then brings in the idea of personal responsibility, because if we start with the idea that we are in the world with a lot of influences and a lot of constraints, then it's really down to me to either to do something with the raw material of the constraints. It certainly doesn't mean that anything is possible, because anything is certainly not possible. We can't be anything we want, because we're determined by the constraints. I'm determined by when I use the word determined, I use it with a small d, not with a capital D. I'm determined, constrained by the fact that I was born at a particular time, in a particular country. These are my, we can't unhappen those things, and that's a part of that's kind of the raw material that I start with. But whatever I make of it is to do with me. I mean, which is another way of saying I can't blame anybody else. Well, I can try and blame somebody else, and that might work for a couple of minutes, but at the end of that couple of minutes, I'd be left with, well, what's that actually done? I've still got it. Whether I think it's their fault or not, I've still got it. So get used to it. In a way, I don't want to say much more about it, because start saying any more, it starts to get really unnecessarily complicated. I suppose the one thing I'd add to it is the thing about this is, and we get a bit more philosophical, we get multisyllabic. It's about the relationship between existentialism and phenomenology. So as far as I could see, existentialism is the body of knowledge that arises when we apply the research method of phenomenology to the study of existence. Now, we can use phenomenology to look at pretty much anything we like in the human field. When we use it to study the nature of existence, then existentialism is the body of knowledge that arises. Now, the thing about phenomenology is that it's not a kind of a single unitary thing. There's no phenomenology without the person who's using the phenomenology, which is the reason why, if we think of all the usual suspects, if we think of how different Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, Simone de Beauvoir are in the things they came up with. Well, of course they are, because they were different. They were born at different times, different places, had different preoccupations, but they all did the same thing. They all applied phenomenology to the study of existence and said, well, you know what, this is what it looks like from here.
Mm.
Well, what Kierkegaard said, well, this is what it looks like from here in mid 19th century Denmark, and Nietzsche the same, and Sartre mid 20th century France, and so on and so on. So this is what it looks like from here, and which is, I mean, it's interesting, but it's more than just interesting. It's highly significant, because the more, the more views we take with Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, de Beauvoir, Marcel, everybody, the more views we get of the same thing, the more accurate we will get, more accurate view we'll get of the thing that we're looking at. To use there's often a metaphor of what is it? 10 blind men describing an elephant. Well, I think I go with that for a while. That we are the blind men, and the elephant is existence. And one person gets hold of a leg, another gets hold of the trunk, and so on. And they're all right, because they've all got hold of the thing, but they haven't got hold of the whole thing. And we cannot ever get hold of the whole thing, which means that our knowledge is always partial. It can never be whole, can't possibly be whole, because we can never see, we can never see, we can see the front of something, but we can never see the back at the same time.
It makes me think that as a human species, we're all just here in this existence. We can never know the entirety of it, but we can work together, share our ideas, and just get a deep.
Yeah, we can never know the entirety of it. I think that it's an idea that Nietzsche tried to get hold of when he talked about perspectivism. It's all about what perspective we have. If we look at it from a long way, or close up, or off to the side, it's about where you are when you're looking at the thing you're looking at. And there's been I mean, all through my, what could I say? It sounds a bit pretentious, but all through my life, and through what I could say is my career, although I never really thought of myself as having one. At various times, I've thought, shall I pursue an art training, or shall I pursue a psychology, psychotherapy, philosophy training? At all those times, I plumped for the psychology training, if only because I didn't see any artists making any money, and I didn't have private means, so I had to have a job. But this is kind of a scenic route to describe the metaphor of, when you look at an object, you only ever see one side, and you only ever see from a particular place. And I mean, I'm in the things I make now are mostly three-dimensional. They're sculptures. And I'm drawn to 3 dimensions just because we live in 3 dimensions. We don't live in 2 dimensions. It seems, you know, much too much like hard work to translate 3 dimensions into 2 and make a picture out of it. Let's do something with the 3 dimensions that we've got. But the sculptures that I make, I try to make sure that they don't have a front or a back or sides. They can be seen equally from all different directions, and that's quite deliberate, because that's I think that's the way things are. That's the way we see. You know, we can only ever see things from one direction, but we can put ourselves in other positions to see them from another direction. Eventually, we get a slightly better version, a slightly fuller version of things. Now, the example of the sculpture is an easy one because it's kind of fixed. It's an object, and if it's metal or wood or stone, life's a bit more complicated because it keeps moving.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at it from one direction, it looks like that. You move around the side, doesn't just look different because you've moved, but it has moved too, which makes it kind of even more difficult, but even more impossible to ever say, I've got it now, I found it. Of course you haven't found it. There's nothing fixed to be found.
And that's what keeps us looking, though, isn't it? I suppose.
But it is, yes. It keeps us. It keeps us interested. Keeps us. Well, it keeps us interested as we are frustrated as well. Bloody thing, it keeps moving.
I
Well,
just thought I got an understanding of that, and now it's all changed. So I have to adapt to that. Yeah.
It keeps moving, but we keep moving. I mean, I keep moving. I mean, you know, the me I am now is not exactly the same as the one I was yesterday or this morning. I mean, obviously there's a similarity because I have in Lang's words, I've got a continuity in space and time, but I am in the very simplest way, I am a day older than I was yesterday. So we change all the time. And everything changes all the time. And I quite like the idea. It's an idea from, I think, from Bakhtin of polyphony. And what I like about that idea is quite it's about trying to encourage as many sounds as we can. Well, what I mean by that in a metaphorical way is many different views, and the more different views, the more different sounds we can hear or appreciate, the richer something becomes. A musical instrument on its own is great. If you a piano is great. If you add it to a few other instruments, all playing in harmony, or perhaps not, then it just becomes richer.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. What introduced you to this field, though? How did you stumble across existential ideas and all of this?
Right. Well, I think we've got to go back quite a long way into the past. After when I finished school, there wasn't anything that particularly interested me that I did at school. I mean, the things were kind of interesting, but not very. That was the first time I considered doing an art training, but decided against it. Instead, I did a psychology training. Now, I didn't really know anything about it. I read Close to Zero, but it seemed like a good idea at the time, which actually has been a kind of a guiding principle of almost everything I'd done. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But it seemed like a good idea at the time. I discovered pretty quickly that it was a pretty terrible idea because, because the course was experimental psychology. It was based in, it was a long time ago, and all the material was experimental data, quantitative data, but based quite strongly around behaviorism. What I did though, I mean, it was great because I would never have done that stuff by choice. So, okay, here we are, try and get hold of this stuff, see what it's got to offer. I think I learned what behaviorism could and couldn't say. I learned what quantitative research could and couldn't find out about. At the same time, because I really wasn't finding it very exciting at all, I read fiction. And in fiction is where I got my existentialism. I was interested in how people live and what people do when they get into particular sort of situations. I wasn't going to find it on the course, so I found it in fiction. At the same time as that, I read R.D. Laing. Now, at that time, I mean, I say I read it. I mean, I know I read the books because I've got the original books and I've got passages underlined all the way through them, but I can't say I really understood them. But he was onto something that I knew was worth catching hold of, but I didn't really know what it was. So I had these three parallel things. There was the behaviorism quantitative stuff. There was fiction, which was teaching me about existentialism, and Lang that was talking to me about a different way of thinking about the person in a psychological sense. So that began my interest in this area, and then that moved me into, well, my first job, I guess, in this area was working in a inpatient psychiatric clinic for adolescents that was, it's no longer in existence, but it was a part of, it was closely connected with the Tavistock Clinic, which, and again, I knew close to zero about the work or never heard of the Tavistock Clinic, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And it was a fabulous idea, actually. And it demystified an immense amount of things. It demystified psychotherapy for me. It demystified psychoanalysis for me. And it also taught me that there was a way of talking about psychotherapy and psychoanalysis that didn't dehumanize.
Mhm.
For example, in all the time I was there, in all the staff meetings I was there, it was described as a therapeutic community, and it was obvious who was in charge, the medical director, but it was also obvious that the place couldn't run at all unless everybody's voice was treated with respect
Mm.
and was treated equally. So there was me coming in. I knew close to zero about anything. I was a nursing assistant, and it was perfectly fine for me to say to the medical director, "Well, actually, I don't think so. I don't think you're right there." And they, "Oh, really? Tell me about it." I thought, "Whoa, what's going on? I don't get it." Except at that time, I thought it was normal. So that place as a way of learning was absolutely fabulous. And so I thought, right, this is good. If this is the way things are, that's I'd like some more of this. This is the arena that I want to spend my time in. unfortunately, it wasn't to be, because I realized that after I left there, that was really quite an unusual place. That when I mixed with other professionals, they did not talk with much respect about either their colleagues or their clients. So okay, I don't get this. I don't. But that was a thing I want. Let's try to hang on to this as as a way of learning that gives everyone respect, which I'd never met up until that time, or only in very small patches at school and university. But it was a different way of learning, and I think I mean if I was to ask the question, okay, what is it that's kept me interested in this field all this time? The thing that's kept me interested in it is I've always been interested in how people learn and what people need in order to learn, and what things are likely to encourage it, what things are likely to put a spanner in the works. And when I say learn, I mean it in the broadest possible sense. Both, learn about what's in the key texts. I mean it about learning in psychotherapy and learning in
Becoming.
in everyday life. Yeah, how do we learn to become who we are? And it's active. It's not passive. It's not just we just sit down and then wake up one day and we've become something. It doesn't work like that. It's active. You've got to you've got to you've got to you've got to decide. You've got to push yourself through things. Right, I want to find out about that now. It's going to be difficult. It is going to be difficult. If it's worth learning, it's going to be difficult. You don't learn things by this nonsense about learning a language in your sleep. Well, I've never tried it, but I can't imagine it works. It's bloody hard work. And so I've always been interested in the learning. I've been interested in existential philosophy as well, but only as a almost an extra thing. I'm much more interested in how we learn than exactly what we learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that brings me to thinking about why have I concentrated on the fields within existential therapy that I've concentrated on? And I have to say this is a hindsight answer rather than it certainly wasn't anything I thought of before. If you'd asked me kind of a few years ago, it seemed interesting. Why? Well, what's the question about? But it's about it's more that existential practice is about learn. We learn how to be a psychotherapist. There are things that we need to learn. We're with somebody, we're in a relationship. There are things to learn about ourselves and how we get on with this sort of issue that comes up within us, and the issue that comes up with the other person engages with us. There are things to learn. It's a skills learning exercise. It's not a technical exercise. It's not a technical procedure. It's about human skills, and so is human development. We learn. The person that we become is the product of what we have learnt previously and what we want to learn tomorrow. And if we stop learning, we become existentially dead. There's coming back to the first question, what's the difference between no, first question, how do I think of existentialism? I think of it as being quite separate from um, physiology. That we can be physiologically alive, but existentially dead. We can be physiologically alive in that, we get up, we have breakfast, we do things, we get on the bus, we do stuff, but we're existentially dead because we don't learn anything. We're existentially dead when today is the same as yesterday.
And we're not curious about anything.
And we're not curious, oh, what's that all about there? The things that have always interested me have been the things that I didn't know the answers to. So as long as we could say, I could say that, as long as there are things that you don't know the answers to and you want to find out, then there's a kind of a glimmer of hope. If you know, I found out pretty much everything I need to know. Well, why are you wasting up valuable oxygen that other people could be using then? It's a bit harsh, but that's what it comes down to. And what is the point of doing anything if you're not, if there aren't things you still want to find out about?
And that very much relates to when we're in those states of having no curiosity, having no wonder, feeling with that question, what is the point? It feels pointless when finding that.
Yes. It's, and I was going to say it'd be nice to get to a point where you never ask yourself what's the point, but I'm not sure if it would be really. But I don't know. That's much too much of a hypothetical question. There are times when you ask yourself, "What's the point? What's the point?" And, what is the point? I mean, it's an excellent question. It's the best question there is almost. What is the point? Oh, right, yeah, that's what the point is. Okay, off we go. Let's go down there this time.
And it can always be changing, that message that you shared at the beginning, that point.
Yes, you're right. I've learned, I've learned in as much as I need to know about that. That was nice. I'm glad I did that. But life's too short. There's more things.
So based on all of these learnings, based on this career and this life that you have lived, what would you describe as your existential offering, as it were? What contribution do you value that you share?
I don't know. It would seem awfully presumptuous for me to say, okay, I've got okay, pipe down, everybody. I'm going to. This is the line, and it seems a bit presumptuous for me to say what the the offering is, except I guess keep asking questions you don't know the answer to. I mean, it might come down to that.
And that comment about it feeling pretentious when I've asked you certain things, it makes me think of that equality that you were mentioning in that first job, that everyone's values and ideas being received.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure if I would be the right person to decide what my existential offering was. I'd have to ask other people what they thought my existential offering was. I mean, I could come up with any number of things, a bit like we were working with a client. At the end of a session, you think it was a brilliant session. I was a fabulous therapist there. My, spot on interpretation. And then they come back the next week and what happened last week? I've forgotten. And okay, well, perhaps it's not for me to say.
Have there been times in life where existential ideas have really helped you to overcome something?
Um, that's quite hard to say as well. If I try and think of particular moments, I'm not sure that I use them in quite that way. I mean, a bit like with a client that suddenly you're presented with a massive challenge, you don't think, what would Kierkegaard have said about this? What would my supervisor say? What would who's written it? You don't do that. You don't go straight to the bookshelves. You you're much more likely to think, much more likely to go almost within yourself and try and find some kind of clear space that you can find to appreciate, to make sense of the nonsense, the chaos that's going on. I mean, if I'm sure, I'm sure you can write lots of existential stuff about that, but it would be about that sense, which that's much more about a way of being, about finding a kind of a clear space that I can trust to, that eventually will make sense sometime, who knows when, of the stuff that's going on. I mean, I suppose I'm thinking particularly of, I know, a challenge like a sudden death of somebody, a sudden, unexpected premature death. How do you make sense of that? I mean, you won't find anything in books that make the slightest difference. Well, you can find some fine words, but you don't need them then. You need to, okay, right, this is right. Stay with whatever this is and try to center yourself, I guess, in those things. If that's about taking responsibility for whatever is kind of emerging, then we could, that's quite an existential principle. But I guess that they're not the things that I would search for first of all. I would think, I would go straight to some really quite experienced, near embodied sense. I mean, if that's what existentialism is about, that's great. But that will be the place I would go. And that's the place I would go at those times. It's probably the place I would go at almost all times as well. And I mean, it has to be said, it might be a slightly unpopular thing, but I don't actually enjoy reading existential philosophy. It's kind of interesting, but I've always read it on a need to know basis. I'd much rather read fiction than philosophy. Philosophy is much too abstract for me. It's kind of interesting, but not that interesting. I'd much rather read, I don't know, any number of authors, because what fiction is doing, what the authors are doing, they're inventing characters, and the skill of the author is in inventing believable characters. They're inventing characters and putting them in situations and see what they do. And that's what I'm interested in. See what they do, see what they learn, see how they kind of stay afloat in their changing circumstances. That's always been interesting. for me. And I think that's probably been my main interest in being a therapist as well. Just finding out, being curious about what people do in different circumstances. If a conversation I have with a client about what decisions are made that they're making under different circumstances, if they find that helpful, and I think they have, then that's a almost a byproduct of. And I don't go into it in order to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I go into it in order to understand how people manage in different circumstances,
I
and
really, yeah.
what people can learn about how to manage in different circumstances.
Mm. I was just going to say, I really appreciate you saying that out loud, that you don't necessarily adore reading these massive existential texts, because I think that that is something that ostracizes people from being able to immerse themselves in these ideas, in this world of thought, if they can't read the texts, or if they don't feel able to or up for it. They feel that they can't then enjoy or experience the existential ideas or philosophies.
Mm.
And I think it's so valuable that you've just shared that that doesn't have to be the case at all. Read it on a need to know basis if you have a need to know basis, but otherwise you can gain
Yeah.
these ideas just from
Yeah.
reading fiction, from learning.
Yes, I mean, if somebody asked me what they ought to read,
Yes.
I would say, well, read Sartre's novels and his plays. Read Simone de Beauvoir's autobiography,
Mm-hmm.
and then read any other novel that you think is saying something.
Mm-hmm.
Read Camus,
Mm-hmm.
and if you really have to, then read Heidegger and so on. But you don't have to. Oh, you don't. You did. No, I don't think. I think you can get a better idea of what these people are on about by reading reading their fiction, and reading other, or read Dostoevsky, read Penelope Lively, read anybody really. I don't care. What depresses me when I ask people what they like reading, it depresses me how few people say that they read fiction. Now, I'm talking about mainly about students now, and it might well be that they don't read it because they just don't have time, because they've got to read Heidegger and Nietzsche and everybody else. But if I had the power, if I wasn't constrained by validating bodies,
Mm-hmm.
I would teach a course that, on human development, for example, that all the readings were fiction. I wouldn't have any philosophy in it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It would be all fiction. And I think it would be a better course for that. It would still be an existential course. We just wouldn't have to read the the usual suspects. We'd be able to read books that, well, what's going to happen on the next page? I tell people to read his Dark Materials or almost anything.
It feels like you say that because the messages are not just the theories. In fact, they're so much more than the theories. It's in the ideas, in the experiences, in the, like you
Well,
said, the characterization, in the
it's
lived world.
about how people live, what people
Yeah.
do when they find themselves in difficult situations. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. For someone who wasn't a student of the course and was interested, heard this world existential floating around, what advice would you give them for exploring this field?
Well, as I said, to read, if they really have to read, fiction, to read Sartre's novels and plays, to read Camus' novels and plays, actually to read almost anything by Simone de Beauvoir. She's a fabulous writer. Um, and after that, then pretty much anything else, and don't be afraid to put the book down if it wasn't grabbing them. But just to, to read, to read about what other people do in different situations. When you read, you read a book, you read a character, you think, oh, what would I do if I was in that situation? Oh yeah, crikey, I'd do that as well. Or no, I wouldn't have done that. Well, why not? What's going on there? You get it's not just reading a book. You have a conversation with the characters, a conversation with the author, and you get something going. And it's curious, isn't it? Because the book, which began as being just ink on a page, then starts being not just ink on a page, it's ink on my pages, and then it's my book. Because you make the book personal by by the way you read it
And interact with it.
and
That's
interact with it. Yeah, yes, you might. Yes, as I said, I know I read Lang all that time ago because I can see all the marks in the margins. So I know that I was, there might be a question mark or exclamation mark or underline. I know I was having a relationship with Lang. I thought I didn't know him, of course, but the way he was coming through the words, through out of the page and into me, it was kind of an imaginary to and fro. And it's that I mean that's why reading. And when I use reading, I use it in quite a loose sense, because we can read a book, we can read a film, we can read a picture in exactly the same way. If it doesn't touch you, if you don't feel it, if all it does to you is go up there, then it's a waste of time. It's got to touch you here in order for it to make a difference. It has to be important, not just interesting.
Mm.
I mean, if I found myself, well, that's a very interesting book, it's a waste of time reading it. If all it was just interesting, then
This makes sense in relation to the metaphors that you were using about movement as well at the beginning, in the sense that if you're not moved by that literature, it doesn't mean that something's wrong with you, but you listen to that. If you're not feeling something embodied in you, feeling excited, that's
yes,
okay, put it down.
yes, it put it down and pick it up another time. It maybe it was the right book at the wrong time. Maybe, who knows?
But keep picking them up.
But yeah, keep picking it up and seeing what you make of it. Yes.
I really appreciate everything that you shared today, Martin. I'm wondering, is there anything, closing thoughts that you wanted to share?
Gosh, nothing that particularly occurs to me. Well, I guess one thing. I mean, you used my new title, at the beginning. My doctorate was it was a doctorate in public works, which essentially was a review. A thing I wrote was a reflexive review of how I came to write everything I've written. And a lot of people, like perhaps yourself, would do a doctorate at the beginning of their career. Now, I did mine at the end. Well, I say end. I'm going to enlarge on what I mean by end in a minute. I certainly didn't do it at the beginning. I've actually done almost everything backwards. But having got to the end, I discover it's not the end. I thought, right, okay, I've done all that. Time to move on to something else. Well, I wonder what I've been doing all this time. Well, that's what I've been doing all this time. But is it time to move on to something else? Well, no more than it ever has been. There's no such thing as, okay, stop that, tie it up, put it in a box, put it up in the attic. Something will continue. I don't know what it is. I'll continue some things and stop doing other things. I think all the it might seem a bit kind of simplistic or even I think almost everything I've done, as I said, I did it because it seemed like a good idea at the time, because it seemed interesting at the time. And fortunately, I found enough things that were interesting to be able to carry on. But when I stopped finding them interesting, I tended to stop doing them. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'd done that. That's interesting, but that was interesting then. But the other thing over there is even more and more interesting now, which is a kind of a long way of saying, I don't know what I'm going to find interesting next. I suspect I will. I'm not quite sure what it'll be, but I certainly hope there will be something. It might be difficult to find out exactly what it is, because I'm not working so much, not working as much as I did, but somehow or another the line will, the thread will continue somehow, I guess. But come back in a few years and I'll tell you in what way it did. I don't know.
I think it is so valuable, that message though, isn't it? Follow what feels interesting to you, because we get caught up and stuck and lost and in despair when we find ourselves following paths which might be interesting to someone else or society, but aren't interesting to ourselves.
Yes, I mean, there were times I followed things that seemed like a good idea at the time, and they were turned out to be appalling ideas and took quite a long time to get out of. But so what else is new? But that principle, just do what's interesting. I mean, life's too short to do anything else.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been good to kind of bring these ideas and put them into a slightly different form than they've been before. I mean, all these ideas are kind of around, but it takes these kind of interviews, these kind of questions to make something very slightly different out of them. Thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing. Thank you so much, Martin.
Thanks.